I think we're live. Yes. Okay. Hello everyone. This is Aditya from the team Voyages into the Past Utit Prabaho. Today we are honored to have with us Professor V. Selvakumar. Sir, he will speak on the topic watercrafts in the Tamil literature, Tamil Sangam literature. Dr. Selvakumar is a very familiar face in the academic circle related to archaeology, prehistory, and ancient history. He did his PhD and postdoctoral research at Deccan College, Pune. He is a faculty member at the Department of Maritime History and Marine Archaeology in Tamil University, Tanjavur. He was Nehru Trust for the India Collections at Victoria and Albert Museum, visiting researcher at Center for Maritime Archaeology in University of Southampton in 2004. Formerly, he was a faculty member at the Center for Heritage Studies in Kerala from 2003 to 2007 and faculty at the Department of Epigraphy and Archaeology in Tamil University from 2007 to 2017. He has published numerous articles and research papers on archaeology, prehistory of South India, maritime archaeology, heritage management, history of science and technology, ceramic studies, Indian ocean cultural interactions, and role and relevance of archaeology in postmodern period, and many more things. He has also co-edited a book, Historical and Archaeological Heritage Management and Cultural Tourism in India and Japan, Issues and Prospects for Development. So without any further ado, I would invite Professor Selvakumar to deliver his lecture. And thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, good evening to you all. I am indeed very happy to be part of this Voyages into the Past. Thanks to the organizers. Once again, I'd like to thank them for arranging this particular lecture so that we can meet directly through online during this Corona time. Today, I am going to speak on watercrafts in the Sangam Tamil literature. In a sense, this topic is very apt to the title of this particular platform, Voyages into the Past, in the sense that voyages have been part of human activities right from the early times. Humans have been using various kind of watercraft for traveling across the world, which is being studied as part of maritime history and marine archaeology. One particular branch of marine archaeology is called nautical archaeology, which focuses especially on ancient shipbuilding and boat building and their technology. While reconstructing the boat building or shipbuilding technology of the ancient times, we do not always have archaeological vestiges, which are very limited. If you take the case of India, we don't have many shipwrecks which are sufficient to display the technological aspect of ancient boat building and other watercraft. So we have to rely upon literature and sculptural representation, other motifs available in various art forms to understand the ancient boat types and their technology. However, there is a problem with these kind of sources. For example, when a poet or an artist illustrates a particular boat or watercraft, there are a lot of limitations. And also, the perception of the particular poet or the artist also matter, because the way that particular watercraft is represented is determined by the understanding of the poet as well as the artist. Therefore, we may not take these kind of representation as 100% representing the ancient boat building technology. However, these representations help us to understand the context and how these watercrafts were used by the people, and what was the cultural context, and what was the function, and so many other factors can be understood by consulting literature. As part of this initiative, I have taken up the Sangam Tamil literature to understand the different type of watercrafts discussed in this particular literature. Currently, in this particular lecture, I am focusing on two particular small watercrafts widely used by the fisher folk. Because if you look at the Sangam literature, you have so much of information which has not been sufficiently utilized. This is what my impression is. In most of the regions, the literature has a lot of information which can be used for reconstructing history. But when we use literature for reconstructing history, we need to be very careful, because sometimes we may misinterpret things, and we need to be highly critical. So, keeping these ideas related to methodology in mind, I am going into this particular lecture where I'll be talking about the types of watercrafts and their cultural context, because most of the early researchers that have been done on the Sangam literature, they just pick one particular term related to an ancient watercraft, and then they go on presenting the analysis and their distribution and their meaning. What I find is that when we work with literature, it is very important to look into the whole poem and whole context in which a particular kind of object or other material culture or any other concept is discussed. So here I am trying to stress the contextual approach, wherein we can understand how a particular watercraft was used. That is my focus here. Now I will move on to the PowerPoint. Before going into the Sangam literature, I will give a brief introduction to Tamil region and South India, about which many of you may not be familiar. I will move on to the slides now. Okay. Yeah. I hope you can see the slides very clearly now. Now, the temporal context, the Sangam Tamil literature is generally placed between 3rd century BCE to 3rd century CE, what is otherwise known as early historic phase or Sangam age. Recently, there are attempts to date the beginning of early historic to a period of 600 BCE based on the dating from Porundal and Kodumanal and several other sites. Currently, we can take these attempts as a hypothetical attempts that seek to accurately date the early historic phase. We need to do more research on this particular phase because we cannot just rely upon one or two C14 or radiocarbon dates. We need more dates and also more analysis into the material culture of this particular time period. I would suggest that the Iron Age early historic period has not been sufficiently researched in South India. Mainly, Iron Age is characterized by the megalithic burials, large stone monuments that are distributed all across. These monuments have been extensively excavated. However, the associated habitation sites have not been sufficiently excavated. This is one of the research problems. So the Iron Age is the age that preceded the composition of the Sangam age. Sangam age has otherwise known as early historic, witnessed the composition of early Tamil poems, which are generally placed between 3rd century BCE to 3rd century CE. And this is also an age of urbanization in South India. So we need to understand the context in which this literature was composed. And that is why I am trying to explain these two cultural phases. So the Iron Age is generally considered to begin around, say, mid first millennium, mid second millennium BC. That is around 1500 BCE, and it continued till the early historic phase. Coming to the area, now I would like to highlight the importance of maritime history. Generally, we tend to understand history from a very narrow regional perspective. Nowadays, we have history of Tamil Nadu, history of Kerala, history of Andhra Pradesh, or Karnataka, or Maharashtra, West Bengal, Central India. We have created so many micro regions. But in one sense, if you want to understand the history, we need to have a holistic perspective. That is why I always argue that we cannot understand Indian history just by confining to what is India's boundary today. So we need to visualize the cultural development in this region from an Indian Ocean or Afro-Eurasian world perspective. So we need to understand the history of East Africa or Europe or Asia as a whole. And only by understanding Indian history from a broad Afro-Eurasian perspective, as well as within the South Asia perspective, we'll be able to get a better understanding. So we cannot just study Indian history just by looking at the evidence within India. You know very well that the prehistoric migration of Homo erectus as well as Homo sapiens did happen, and lot of these plants or agricultural crops were introduced from Africa and other areas. In fact, the whole regions of Afro-Eurasian world was interacting. But by limiting ourselves to this national, modern, contemporary boundaries, we are disconnecting all those understanding. That is why I would argue that when you want to understand Indian history holistically, you need to look at the land, India, the modern, what we call India now itself, and also the long distance connections that India has had. That is why Indian Ocean perspective is very important. And within that, we have several concepts like Indo-Roman perspective, Indian Ocean perspective, Silk Route perspective, maritime Silk Route perspective, or these were mainly highlighted by the initiative of the China and other associated developments. And we have Bay of Bengal Sphere and India Southeast Asia interactions, in which Indians try to visualize the Indianization in Southeast Asia, which is also criticized by some of the researchers. And again, the Mediterranean, Red Sea, Arabian, Western Indian Ocean. These are all micro regional perspectives. Now, my focus is on South India, the region of Tamilagam, mainly Tamil Nadu and Kerala, for which we have this Sangam Tamil literature. And this is a map of this area. I wanted to show you the period that I am talking is mainly between 3rd century BCE and 3rd century CE. And you need to know what are the important ports in these regions. And at these ports, we have a lot of evidence, like what you have at Tamluk and Chandraketugarh in Bengal. We have had ports all along the Indian Ocean regions, and they are mentioned in the Indian as well as foreign Greco-Roman literature. Some of the important ports are excavated. Some of them have been archaeologically excavated. For example, Arikemedu, which was excavated by Mortimer Wheeler, Kaveri Pumpattinam, Alahankulam, Korkai, and these are some of the ports mentioned in the text not yet identified. Muziris is one of the famous port or a major emporia on the west coast of India, located in Kerala near Ernakulam. And this site we have excavated as part of a team at Pattanam, and Pattanam could be Muziris as according to a hypothesis. Like that, we have a lot of ports, other facilities all across the Indian Ocean emerging somewhere in the late or mid first millennium BC. They are very much indicating the interactions that India has had. This is another map. This map shows you the overall Indian Ocean region, how these monsoon winds were very important in the connectivity, how different regions interacted and leading to the cultural development. So now I would like to summarize the context in which we are having this Sangam literature and also this particular watercrafts. So this early historic period, as I said, otherwise known as the Sangam age, witnessed the emergence of political powers. Mainly, these powers were kind of chiefs or political formations. We cannot categorize them into a state formation. These were all political formations of certain chiefs and kings who had definite political and territorial control and capital. They were not like very simple entities, but at the same time, we cannot categorize them as a state in the modern sense of the term. And these people had a territorial control, they had controlled certain political headquarters and also certain port functions, and they were frequently fighting among themselves. It is in this context a lot of industrial production also took place. Industrial in a very early historic, in a very old sense, not in modern sense. People were producing beads, people were producing textile, and they were producing metal, glass beads, stone ornaments based on the raw material that they were acquiring along the coast, and then they were exporting and also they were exchanging with the produce from the hinterland. So that is the context what we call as urbanization in a limited sense. We cannot compare early historic urbanization with the contemporary or modern period urbanization. It was much different. So we understand this urbanization by measuring the material culture. By excavating the archaeological site, we are able to assess the nature of urbanization, which is indicated by the size of the settlement, type of objects that we are finding, and the internal architecture and several other criteria. So development of local trade was very predominant, and also in this period we have evidence for the emergence of intermediaries or traders who were called as Vanikan or Banik. It's very much a Prakrit term, and also we have evidence of Nigama or merchant guilds in a very probably in a small kind of organization that existed at the key centers and trade centers as well as political headquarters and ports. So we also have evidence of specialized traders mentioned in the early Tamil Brahmi inscriptions. So we also have evidence of long distance trade, which is exemplified the references in Periplus. You must be familiar with the text Periplus and Ptolemy and Pliny's writings. They extensively talk about the trade and interaction with India and Tamil region and other parts of India. We also have evidence of introduction of coin in this early historic period. We have found punchmark coins, Roman coins, and local coins of the local kings at several sites. We also have, as I said, the Indian Ocean interaction is evidenced by the material culture of Indian and South Indian origin formed at many sites. For example, Bernike, Kuseral, Kadim, Sumaram, and also in Thailand and several other sites. And this period is also characterized by the religious networks. We have development of Buddhist and Jain networks emerging, and at the key sites we have evidence of these Shramanas living in the cave shelters. I'm not showing all the maps, but we have a lot of sites. Similarly, ports and urban centers, production center where industrial activities took place. Similarly, long distance trade routes developed and navigation was also there. And we will move to the Sangam Age society. How was this society at the Sangam Age? The society was, it was consisting of various ethnic groups. It was a kind of open society where we had several ethnic identities, but social distinction and rudimentary social hierarchy existed. Some of these hierarchies are described in literature. We cannot directly take all the literature ideas expressed in the literature to be literally true. So there are a lot of issues in the interpretation. We also have evidence of poverty in this period. Mainly hunter-gatherers probably were living in poverty, and they were patronized by the chiefs. And these are some of the previous research on this early historic South India and long distance trade. I'll not go into the details. Now we move into the Iron Age. What kind of material culture we have for the Iron Age? As I said already, these burials were created for the dead people during the Iron Age. And this phase is also known as megalithic period, where the dead people were buried. Either the body was cremated or they were left to the nature, and some select bones were placed within these burials, and these stone monuments are found all across South India. This one is a stone circle or a cane circle. This is a cyst burial. This is a dolmen with porthole. This porthole is interesting. It is associated with the belief or related to the passage of the soul into this chamber. This one is umbrella stone. This one is a cyst burial with a capstone. This is sarcophagus, and this is menhir. We have these kind of urns, and sometimes these pottery placed within the urns have these kind of graffiti marks. They are very interesting. These burials have these kind of iron swords and also cornelian beads, black and red ware pottery. Sometimes these sarcophagus are in the form of a ram or a male goat. These forms are also found, and in this early historic period, we get evidence for urbanization, introduction of writing, craft, and as I said already, we have evidence of brick architecture at the key sites. These are some of the important archaeological sites. You see extensive settlement of this region during the Iron Age period, and different type of megalithic burials are presented here in this. We also get evidence of writing on ceramics, Tamil Brahmi, and these writings are very interesting. They indicate the names of individuals in which we have both Prakrit as well as Tamil names. This one reads Atiyakan, and this is Nedinkili. So we get these kind of objects, metal objects with the Brahmi inscriptions. We also have, you must be familiar with these sources. I will not go into the details. We have Strabo's geography, Periplus, Pliny's, Ptolemy's work, and other literature. We have this Pitungarian table that talks about that is one of the earliest map representing India and Sri Lanka. You must be familiar with this kind of evidence. It is kept in Vienna, in Austria now, and we have Sangam Tamil literature, which is the main source here, which is actually divided into 8 anthologies and 10 long poems, Ettu Togai and Pattu Pattu. So now I am generally focusing on this Ettu Togai and Pattu Pattu to look into the references related to the watercrafts. That is the main focus of my lecture. Since I was told many of the students are from undergraduate level, I thought it will be apt to give an introduction before going into the watercrafts. That is why I wanted to give this particular introduction. Almost 25 minutes I took. I think it's necessary for the students to understand these things. And we have evidence of internal as well as internal trade and exchange in this period, and that is also reflected. And the salt was one of the important commodity that was traded. There were specialized merchants of salt called Umanas, and they were selling across the territory. This is another map that shows you the hinterland settlements and the coastal towns of the early historic period. We also have certain representation of watercrafts in early historic period. This particular representation is found on a pottery from the site of Adakankula. You can see this watercraft and the oars and the mast and other features. This is a representation in a Satavahana coin. This is a representation of a boat at Ostia in Rome. This is another representation from a motif at the site of Ajanta. So you get many such representation. This is another representation of a boat from Ajanta, wherein you can see the vessels, ceramic vessels placed inside. So we get many such representations of watercrafts. So watercrafts, and now I'll move into the main part of my paper. We have evidence of these watercrafts right from the time of Indus Valley. We have these boats displayed in some of the seals of Indus Valley. Similarly, our literature also talks about several kinds of watercrafts. In addition to that, in ethnographic context, we have evidence of these watercrafts being used by several people in the coastal context, and several scholars have researched on them in detail. James Hornell is one of the important colonial period scholar who has given a brief account of ethnographic specimens of watercrafts in South India, and other scholars, as I said, McGrail, Sean McGrail, Lucy Blue, Rajamanikam, and others have undertaken study on the ethnographic aspects of the traditional boat building based on field work among the contemporary fisher folk. I'll not go into the details. Some of these scholars have looked into the literature, trying to understand the watercrafts. So several types of watercrafts are mentioned in the Sangam literature. As I said, this literature is generally datable between 3rd century BC, 3rd century CE. And some of these watercrafts could be classified into small and medium type and large sea-going vessels. So this literature helps us to understand the nomenclature of the watercrafts. What were the names of these watercrafts? So when we look into the literature, we get these poems that discuss in detail about the watercrafts and their function. For example, the names are Ambi, Ambi, Timil, Thoni, and Vodam. These are all small or medium type watercrafts. Here, I have taken up 2 watercrafts because when I looked into the literature, I found not many detailed studies have been undertaken. This is what I find in many of the sources related to Indian history. We had to undertake very detailed studies. Sometimes, students as well as doctoral researchers, for want of time, they just focus on certain aspects and they leave many of these details untouched. Therefore, I feel we need a very critical and very detailed study on our sources related to Indian history. The first is a boat type called Ambi, and this is a kind of microscopic studies where some people you may find it a bit difficult. So I am trying to speak slowly because we are dealing with a lot of Tamil terms. Ambi is a type of watercraft and it is referred to in Tamil literature very often. The term is considered to have derived from a word ambu. Ambu means arrow, and also it means sea, also water body. So we do not know why, what is the reason for the naming of a particular watercraft. For example, we call a ship vessel. Vessel means also a cooking vessel. So vessel means basically a container. So interestingly, same way in Tamil also we use the word kalam to refer to a vessel, a cooking vessel, at the same time to ship. This is something interesting. Why we use a particular term to describe a particular watercraft. So we are trying to get into the etymological aspects of names that are used here. Why a particular name is given to a particular watercraft. So interestingly, the term Ampi is also occurs in Kannada. Appears to be a term associated with the Dravidian linguistic family. Ambikara is in Karnataka also. I started searching. I found it interesting that Ambi is a term that is also used in Kannada, and Ambikara means it refers to a boatman. So whereas in Tamil we don't use Ambikara, but only this term is found in the literature. If you go to contemporary context in Tamil Nadu, nobody uses the term Ambi. But this term is found only in the literature. But whereas in Karnataka, this particular term is preserved among the local people. So this is one understanding that we get from Sangam Tamil literature. When we are trying to work on the early Tamil literature, we feel that it is very important that we also compare the terms with the entire Dravidian languages. Though the literature is known as Tamil, it has a lot of information, lot of terminologies that could be better interpreted if you know the knowledge of Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, and Kannada, and also Tulu. So this is something interesting. Similarly, if you know some Prakrit and also Sanskrit, that will be useful. So what I am trying to argue is, even if you are working with only Sangam Tamil literature, the knowledge of other languages, comparing, this is what we call comparative studies. You know how these terms are found, how these terms are described in Sangam literature, how they are also described in the medieval literature, Devaram literature. So this kind of comparative understanding helps us to interpret better, and how what kind of terms are used in modern Tamil. We are not dealing with modern Tamil when we talk about these terms. That is why these kind of comparative studies are very important in interpreting literature. Basically, here we are excavating the literature, we are excavating the meanings of the terms. So not in an archaeological sense, but in trying to understand the meaning. So when we are dealing with the words, we need to be very careful. This is what I learned from history. Sometimes people simply translate a word that is found in literature based on the contemporary meaning. So the word may be same. The word that was used in 2000 years ago, that was used in 1000 years ago, that was used in 500 years ago in inscription, it may read same, it may be written in a similar manner, but the meaning might not be similar. The meaning might have changed over a period of time. That we need to be careful. I have seen sometimes people translating Devadasis into prostitute. That was again problematic. People simply give a meaning that was prevalent in the 19th 20th century to a term that was used in the earlier century. So this, we need to be very careful when we are interpreting the primary sources, either literature or inscription. And we cannot give a contemporary meaning. We have to look at the context as a whole and see what exactly was the meaning given. So this is very important when we work with literature as well as inscriptions, the words and their meanings. So now we will come to this term Ambikara. In the medieval period, there was a saint named Ambikara Chaudaya. That is very important. He was a Vachanakara, he was a saint, and that is some important additional information which I found. So I found a lot of similarity with this particular term Ambi with the Kannada terms, but whereas in contemporary Tamil it is not used. This I found very interesting. Now we will move into the literature. So when I take a literature, when I read, I found it very interesting when we take the poem, one poem at a time, and go into the meaning in detail. So that gives you a better understanding. So basically, we are trying to get into the mind of the poet. Why the poet uses a particular watercraft, in what sense he or she uses it. Here, the aim of the poet is not to describe the watercraft or the ship or a boat or its technology. He or she, the poet, simply uses it as a term, and the poet describes the context. This is what I was interested in. Rather than just taking the term blindly and giving a statistics, I thought it is better to look into the context. So what I have done in this particular presentation is to look into the context and using a contextual approach. Avinanuru 187 compares an amphi watercraft with an elephant and narrates the context of its use. The fisher folk of the coast were involved in fishing, which was their primary subsistence production. So this Ambi is invariably associated with the fisher folk. The Ambi watercrafts of the Pandavas, who were the fisher folk of the coastal South India, moved beyond the scary ferry points. That is how the poet describes. These are all Turai. Turai is the term that is mentioned here. Turai is very important. It is a suffix referring to a point of entry into a river or into the sea, which were here the poet says the ferry points were infested with sharks that had a saw-like mouth. They proceeded into the sea for the daytime fishing. So here clearly the poet narrates that Ampi as a watercraft was taken into the sea for daytime fishing. So this is very important. The literature also talks about nighttime fishing, wherein people go in the night and return early in the morning. So this is something daytime fishing. And here the boat is narrated by the poet as resembling a sleeping elephant. So the poetic narration perhaps indicates that the Pardavar fisher folk used this watercraft predominantly in the coastal context in the sea, and it also suggests that Ambi was a medium-sized craft because the poet compares this with an elephant. This is another poem wherein Pronanuru 343, which presents a very beautiful narration of the context and use of Ampi boards. So this is very important. So here, the fisher folk use this Ampi for exchanging fish that they caught for the paddy that was produced by the farmers in the marshy fields near the coastal area. This particular description occurs in the context of Musri, the celebrated port mentioned as Musris in Western literature, and the poet narrates the heaps of paddy on the boat resemble the houses on the land. So here the poet gives a kind of comparison between the boats and houses and how they are giving a false impression. The boats appears like houses and the houses appears like boat. That is the narration given. This is simply a poetic technique. And here the idea of Amphi used by the fisher folk for exchanging their produce in the hinterland. So in the earlier poem we saw that Ambi boat was getting into the sea, going for fishing, for daytime fishing. Here it goes in opposite direction to exchange the produce. And chiefs as Ambi in the ferry point of Dharma. This is another poetic narration. In the early historic period, several chiefs existed, and they simply supported the people. The early historic society, in a sense, it was in transition, and there are, as I said, some people say that it was state-like political formation. It was not state-like; it was a tribal political formations. But we can say these early entities were not simply tribal, and they were a kind of political formation with a weak structure, but they had strong territorial control. That we can understand by looking at the references. So here, Purananuru 381 mentions a chieftain who helps the poor people, and the chief who helps the poor people to cross their condition of poverty. So here, the chief is described as a watercraft, like the way a watercraft helps people to cross a river. The chief helps other people to navigate their condition of poverty. So here the poet compares the particular watercraft, the chief, and the ferry point is described as Dharma point, a kind of Dharma or Arathurai. That is how the poetic narration is. So the poet takes the comparison between the act of the chief and the act of the watercraft, how poverty existed. So this is the idea that we get from the literature, that as people visualize, Sangam age not was an age of honey and milk. Poverty existed, and there were inequalities, and many kind of realistic representation are found in the literature. When you go into the text, you can understand this context. Natchinai 315, another poem, mentions about an abandoned Ampi. So here, this Ampi boat was abandoned, and that is being compared to a bull of a farmer, which is not used in the field. So here, the poet takes this watercraft as an object for his poetic narration. So he compares an abandoned. So normally it is common if you travel in the coastal areas, the boats are abandoned. Any coastal site you visit, you can see boats are abandoned. Some of the boats are in use. All these things you can see very clearly. So that is being narrated here in this particular poem. There is another poem in Chilapadikaram which talks about Ambi with different kind of figurehead. So there are Ampis which look like horses with kind of horse head, with lion and elephant. So here we get a slightly later text of Chilapadikaram that describes the Ampi boats with different kind of figureheads in the beginning. So this is something very interesting. There is another poem that discusses about Ampi resembling a water buffalo bathing in the river. So another poem which mentions about Paradavar. Paradavars are basically fisher folk. They travel down an Ampi, graft like a mahout on an elephant. So this is another comparison. So here the poem narrates the Ampi was loaded with a large volume of fishing nets made of ropes spun out of finely crafted fiber. Look at this description. So here I have struggled to translate as it is. So the poet goes into the poet takes the words and move into a kind of narrative. So here, ropes spun out of finely crafted fiber. That is the description found in the poem. This was the scenario in the fishing settlement depicted in Natchinai poem. Natchinai is one text. It has a collection of poems. Poem 74 talks about this. So here also we get reference to this particular watercraft mainly used by the fisher folk. Natchinai 354 mentions about the Ampi which lies in the water body and moving here and there due to the action of the wind. This is something a kind of naturalist description narrative. Perhaps such boats were secured in the coastal backwater areas. You can see this even today. There is another poem of Aingru Nuru 168 talks about a crow laying egg within the Ambi craft. So it always happens in Chennai. It so happens that wherever the boats are abandoned, you find lovers sitting, hiding behind, because in the beach it's so hot, they use the shadow. So these are all secondary function of a watercraft in the coastal area. So when a watercraft is abandoned or it is lying, many people use it for different perspectives. So that is brought out in this poem. Another poem, Paripadal 75, mentions about the use of Ambi in the hinterland near the town of Madurai. So this town of Madurai is located about 200 kilometers inside. In the river Vaigai flows near Madurai. You know about the famous Meenakshi temple at Madurai. Here, this is a very important description. Here, it is very clear that Ampi was the name used for the boats that were plying on the river Vaigai. So this is something strange. Whereas the literature discusses about the term Ambi, but today we don't find this term at all. We don't know. It's very strange. Why? We do not know. So we have this term existing in Karnataka. That is very strange. Driving a bullock like driving an Ampi. So here also these two acts are compared in Kalitohai. The fisherman who rode an Ampi, a person who rode on a bullock. So these two people are compared. Ampi in Ramayana, in the medieval text, It also occurs in the medieval context in Tamil Ramayana of Kampar, dated to 12th century CE, in the context of Gugan, who was was described as a owner of 1,000 watercrafts trying to help Rama to cross the Ganga. Ambi in the proverb. So you have these terms occurring. Another, these are the descriptions about one term Ambi. So I have tried to list all the occurrences, trying to understand the meaning of the term Ambi. It is very clear that most of these descriptions of Ambi occurs in the context of interland, inland water, as well as coastal water, and it was mainly used by the fisher folk. This is very important. But when we talk about the long distance trade, you get clearly another category of watercraft. So here now I will come to the another second category. So far we were looking into Ambi. Now we will look into the Thimil. This is another watercraft. It's a small watercraft that occurs very frequently in the early literature as Thimil. Thimil is very interestingly, it refers to the hump of a bull. So here it is a kind of watercraft. It is maybe a kind of a logboat or a raft of Kattumaram or something like Tamil Kattumaram, which is very common in the east coast of India, right from Orissa down to Kerala. All along you find nowadays these, after the tsunami of 2004, people no longer use this Kattumaram. Not many of them use, they shifted to fiber boats. This is one of the changes that we see. And here there is a description of fish hunters with the Thimil boat that is spoken. So here you get a different kind of boat, watercraft, much different from Ambi, and it is used for fishing in the coastal area. So, and also this is spoken as Kodun Thimil. This is a boat, a watercraft with curved front area. Nattinai 175 speaks about Parabas with curved Thimil crafts leave the heaps of fat fish that they caught in the on the sand spread as piles. They light the lamp. So here, this particular poem is very interesting. How these people were lighting a lamp made of bivalve shells filled with fish fat. Such was the scenario in a Thurai settlement. Thurai is basically a ferry point. And the scenario in a fishing village is spoken. The Paradavar settlement was filled with noise. And the sound is very one of the important theme of these poems. So whenever the poets speak about the villages, they talk about the different kinds of sounds that were emanating. As an archaeologist or historians, we may not be bothered with sound. What happens in a market? You go to a busy market in Karnataka Circus or everywhere. What kind of sound that produces? A village. What kind of sound it produces. So that was very beautifully narrated by the poets in many of those poems. How this noise of the sea, noise of the waves of the sea, noise of the people, that is spoken in the poems. Mainly how these fishermen settlements looked like, that is narrated. And the Thimil craft venture into the sea and hunt the shark. Mainly shark catching or hunting is specified here. For this particular shark catching, Thimil was used. Whereas in the case of the previous Ambi, we don't find any evidence for shark, shark fishing or shark catching. So this is very particularly associated with the Thimil folk. So here, there's another poetic narration very beautifully talks about how fisher folk children count the Thimil boats which are fishing on the sea. Says these kids point to the different Thimil and they say, "This is your father's, this is my father's Thimil." So that kind of narrative is found in the literature. And counting the lamps on the Thimil of the Paradavas. This is another poem. Nattinai 372 mentions about the people of the coastal villages counting the lamps or light on the Tamil of the Paradavas who fish in the night time. Here, the Paradavas are spoken as Panithalai Paradavar because these people are fishing and their head is filled with Panithalai, then dewdrops. They fill in the night. So that is narrated in the poem. The poem also refers to the girls washing the dry fish spread on the sand dunes and who chases away the birds. So you get these kind of minute description, and also to the same village, the bullock carts are coming, and where the salt merchants called umanas, they are coming to fetch the salt, which they will transport to the hinterland and sell or exchange. And here we have another kind of description in the context of Timid. The fisher folk go into catch a shark, whereas the shark tore the uh, fishing net. That is spoken. And Paradavas collecting the Tarbinella pyram. That is also very uh, vividly spoken. So this was actually done in the contemporary context, and here they collect this particular shell. That is also known. And another reference, Kalitobe 149, mentions about the scenario in the coastal area as resembling battlefields of a king. So normally you go to any fishing settlement when the ship arrives, things look, helter skelter. So that condition is narrated here. So here, the group of Tamil fish, actually, when fisher folk go into the sea, they don't go alone. Sometimes, 150 people, they go together because it is in a sense, safe for them. Suppose if one person falls into the sea, others can help and rescue them. So here, the poet compares them with the elephantry of a king, and the waves are like a drum. So the poet narrates this and counting of returning of Timur. So this Agnanuru 190 mentions about the hero of the poem counting the Tamil crafts that return from the sea. This normally we also do, as if you go to the coast, you look at the ship and you count. These kind of things are also narrated in the literature. Nachinai 388 speaks about the Paradavar fishing with a strong Tamil craft with a light in the night. So this kind of fishing in the night is also spoken. That is something very interesting. In the earlier references, we get daytime fishing using ambi. Here, Tamil was used for nighttime fishing. So from these kind of description, we got to understand what kind of boat was used for what purpose. Tamil in the form of Mars or the Red Star. Prananuru poem mentions about the Mars as Red Star appearing like a light on the Tamil boat. So this reference also suggests that the Paradavas were using the knowledge of the stars for their navigation. Yeah, then we also get other references in the context of Kaveri Pumbuttinam. Pattinapalai mentions that the Paradavas with curved Tamil count the lights lit on the tall building. So here the poet uses opposite narrative, while in the earlier case, the people on the land counted the boats with light in the sea. Here they are counting the uh, light lit on the houses from the sea. So this kind of counter description is also spoken. So Timil on the river Vaigai, Paradavar hunting shark. These are, so I will not go into the detail because I have taken a lot of time. And father guiding the son in the sea. That is also spoken in the poem. How these younger fisher folk learned the craft from the elder, and sandbars near the mouth of the river, how they break the Tamil craft. That is also spoken in another kind of poem. So these are some of the references I thought I would speak. Now I'll share another kind of document that will tell you about various crafts that were used in the Sangam age. One second. One second. Sorry. Yeah, I will share this. I think you can see this now. Yeah, good. Yes. So here in this table, what I have done is I have listed the different kind of watercrafts that are mentioned in the literature. I have not given a complete description because each type of watercraft is very interesting. Here I have given the number of occurrences, Ambi, 9 plus 14, and its meaning, Punai, that is spoken here. Okay, I will make it right. Yeah, yeah. One second. Right. Yeah. So here Ampi, Punai. Punai is something like a raft. Pony. Pony is a dugout canoe that also occurs in 7 instances. Timil is the one which we spoke just now. Timil and Ampi, these are the two types we discussed today. This one and this one. There are more types I didn't discuss because of the lack of time. So, by looking at those references, we are able to understand. So, Kalam is a plank-built vessel. So, this is a different kind of large sea-going vessel that is spoken only in the context of sea-going activities. Navai, again, this term is very similar to Sanskrit and Prakrit term, and that is also occurring. It is Indo-Aryan. And Vangam or Banka is very interesting category. This is considered to be this term very interestingly occurs in Indonesia and also in Philippines. So this is probably an East Bay of Bengal type of watercraft that has commonality all across. So this term Mangam is very interesting. Similarly, Padak or Paravai, this is very interesting. Prahu, this term Prahu also occurs Indonesia. It is described also as Pahri. So these terms also, the terms related to these watercrafts can also tell lot of stories how these ideas were exchanged. We get a reference to Odam and also Madalai. So these are some of the important categories of watercrafts occurring in the Tamil literature. So this I wanted to share how this, these different kinds of crafts are referred to in the literature, how some are similar to those found in some of the names like Pragu and Parua. They are all very Parua of Madal Parua of Sri Lanka. So how these terminologies are very similar. This is what I wanted to highlight, that some of these terms we are using from the prehistoric time. Probably the connection with the Austroasiatic is very much indicated. So by looking at these terms, we can better understand how these terms, how these ideas were borrowed, or how people were connected in the ancient time. So you get all these information. Also, what happened is I checked with some of the fishermen in Banjawur district. They mentioned that there are some type of fish catching fish using a light. They say that there are two kind of fish called Mural and Kalingan fish. These two kind of fish are caught using this kind of light. In the similarly, hammer shark is caught with a fishing net, not with any other equipment. They also, by inquiring with the local fisher folk, we are able to understand, how these people were using this kind of watercrafts. So my argument is that in order to understand history from a holistic perspective, we need to have a good understanding of various sources. I feel literature is one of the important sources, and sometimes historians tend to ignore the value of literature and very few university departments or the history syllabus focus on literature. Even in our case, we were never taught about Tamil literature when I was doing my degree as part of the history course or Indian culture course, and also later on master's course in archaeology. Later on, when I started looking into the literature, I found it very interesting. So the one of the important argument that I want to highlight is that we cannot understand the history of any region just by looking at historical record or inscriptions alone. We need to understand the contemporary culture. That is where anthropology and ethnography is very important. How can you understand India just by reading 20 textbooks? It is impossible. You need to understand the culture of India. You need to travel to different regions of India. Without doing this, we can never be able to make meaning of the sources. Therefore, if you want to master the history of India, you need to know the local languages. You need to know Sanskrit and Prakrit. At the same time, local languages, local literature, and also the culture. You need to go and experience culture. Suppose if you don't travel in central India or other areas, northeastern India, you will never feel the pulse of India. So though you claim, if you are a historian, you know that you have read a lot of literature, visiting places, undertaking ethnographic or anthropological fieldwork, looking at literature, looking at archaeology, looking at oral tradition, they all can help you to understand history better. However, when we deal with the oral tradition and literature, we need to be extremely careful because we cannot jump into conclusion. However, this knowledge of contemporary society, living culture, anthropology, they are all equally important for understanding our history. Therefore, history should not ignore literature, archaeology, or oral tradition. We should not say that we will depend. We look only the written records or inscriptions alone. Literature has to be very carefully and critically approached. Same way, other sources. Similarly, I feel the history of Indian fisher folk has not been sufficiently understood or sufficiently researched. The fisher folk has been the backbone of Indian history, especially in the maritime corridor. They have done a lot of contribution. Even today, they have very deep knowledge about the ocean currents, different type of winds and fishing. Undertaking ethnographic fieldwork among the fisher folk can also enrich our history. There are certain themes in Indian history, they are not being being focused sufficiently. So therefore, I feel the history of forest people, people who are living in the forest or hunter-gatherers, similarly, history of fisher folk and their way of life should also be given equal importance. In the same way, literature and other sources should also be used in writing history, but we need to be adopting a very rigorous historical method and it should be very critical. With these points, I would like to finish my lecture. Thank you for the opportunity. If you need any kind of explanation or questions, you are open. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such this
Okay.
wonderful. And this, I think, the audience also learned a lot on this topic because this the watercrafts and these sorts of aspect were not discussed in our syllabus on various universities. But if we all learned about Sangam literature, but these types of things is not remain unknown. So thank you, sir, for to showing these sorts of aspects about the Sangam literature and also about the history of the fisher folks. Sir, I have a question that as I'm from Bengal, what there is a chance for working on the watercrafts on in the context of ancient Bengal or what sorts of work have been done on this particular aspect? Because Bengal is called in Bengali Nodimatrik. There is this surrounded by rivers. So what there is a how far there is a chance for work on the context of Bengal?
Bengal, there are people who have worked on watercraft, but there is a potential for finding old watercraft in submerged context. See, one of the in Kerala, there was a find in 2004. That is where, if historians and archaeologists keep a network in the villages, while people are digging or when there is an erosion, they may come across old watercraft. Apart from working on living crafts, living tradition of making watercraft, there is a chance to find buried watercrafts in Bengal. This is one area, and also I have some friends who have documented the traditional watercrafts of Bengal. Lotika Varadarajan and other scholars have documented. Uh, there is more scope to undertake studies because these kind of traditional watercrafts are disappearing. And apart from the watercrafts, the lives of the fisher folk and they kind of ethnographic study that can also shed more light on their traditional knowledge, and that also can contribute to the reconstruction of history and mapping. Although there are studies, more detailed work could be undertaken on the traditional watercrafts, especially the terminology. This involves intensive field work interacting with the people. That can give us a lot of information. Yes.
And sir, another question is that that in Sangam literature, what the evidence that we found with about the trade relationship with the South India and the Eastern India? Is there any? Because
Yeah, we have actually. I have a paper coming about. It is being published by Primus. That is a very detailed paper that talks about connection with Bengal. We have reference to Bengal in the name of Gangai. So
yes,
there was no name of Bengal at that point of
yes, yes,
time.
yes,
We talk about Ganga. The region was Bengal was known as Ganga. So there are descriptions about the ships of Vangam going to Ganga. So it was a Vangam is one type of ship. It is a huge sea-going ship that moves to Ganga, and apart from that, we get a lot of related ware, ceramics that were probably produced in Ganga. So this connection between Bengal and South India was one important because at that point of time, there was a major connecting corridor from Bengal down to South India, and from there they went to Rome and other areas. So we get a lot of ceramics in Arikemedu, which was probably produced in Bengal. We also get some Prakrit names. They indicate connections with Bengal. So this also continued in the later time. You have the trade in shells, what is known as Kavadapuram, Kavada, which became Kapartaka. The shells were used as cash in Bengal, and the shells probably they came from Lakshadweep and southern part of this region. So these shells were traded. Similarly, rice trade also did happen, and Islam also probably came through. This was one of the route through which Islam came to Bengal. So we get a lot of evidence for interaction between South India. In addition to that, we get the hinterland. These Rajendra Choda's war trophies, some of the typical Bengal Pala sculptures are found in Choda period. So when Rajendra Choda went, he did not go into North India. He uses probably, he was navigating towards Bengal. So this was a very important corridor from the early period, I feel. So this connection, I'm working with my friend Kaushik Gangabadia from Calcutta University. There is much more to understand this connection by looking at the archaeological material. And also this trade in shell bangles. The tradition of using shell bangle is prevalent in Bengal, but you get a lot of these shell bangle shell Turbinella pyrum available in the east coast. This was one of the important material that was used as a trade. So we get a lot of evidence for connectivity, because for Bengal, for connecting with the West Asia and other regions, South India, this corridor moved via Sri Lanka and South India, and then went to West Asia. That is why even in the Roman trade, the connection was with this particular region, and some of the goods that were produced in Bengal, they came to West Coast, because we get so much reference to that. I have not taken into, because this literature has so much of information. But most of the researchers, what they do, they go for one or two select poems. Suppose if I write a research paper, they take one or two references. So if you look at our literature in more detail, you get a lot of information. This is what I did, one paper only on salt related reference in Sangam literature. This one is on watercraft. I have taken only two watercrafts, Timil and Ampi. So I find the undertaking of these kind of micro themes and working out several papers really helps. So you get to understand, because sometimes these poems you need to read twice or thrice to get to their meaning, because these poems do not have the, they are not like contemporary poems. You have to consult several dictionaries, lexicons to understand their true meaning, and there are commentators, 2 or 3 commentators giving 2-3 different meanings. So sometimes you have to read 2-3 commentators to understand the correct meaning, and then translation is also a problem. Translation from Tamil to English. In that way, by reading them, you get to understand better. So you read the early Tamil Sangam literature, work on medieval literature, then you come to medieval inscriptions, you get a new insight. Rather than you go directly into these inscription, you have a good knowledge over the literature, and then you consult this, you get a better understanding. Similarly, we work with contemporary Tamil terms with the knowledge of Sangam Tamil and this, and it helps you. Sometimes these terms that are described in the literature, not in other work, but they are found in the colloquial language of the local people in a particular region. So that is how knowing the language of local people, knowing this literature, inscriptions, and it all helps. So this is where, when you work on historical archaeology, this kind of holistic approach helps you to interpret the literature.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. And let's move to the, if any question by the audience. Okay, so there is a question from Rakesh De. Thank you, sir, for your lecture. My question is how the instances of watercrafts of Sangam literature can be further interpreted by the archaeological sources, and are the mentions of watercrafts of Sangam literature found in the literary sources of the other part of India, or it is limited only to southern part of our country? Thank you.
Okay, this I mentioned. Actually, we have reference to Navai. Navai is basically now. The term navy, interestingly, this term navy, they are all interrelated. The term Navai occurs in Sangam literature. Very clearly, it indicates a connection between the northern India and Tamil, South India. Second term, Vangam. Vangam is much more interesting. Vangam was a kind of seagoing vessel that went from Tamil Nadu to Ganga region. The same Vangam occurs in Indonesia. You check in Philippines. In Philippines and in Indonesia, Bangka is a type of boat. There are some scholars who have argued this Bangka was an Austro-Asiatic boat. They say that this watercraft, the term Bangka, what you find here is very similar. Another term called Prahu. Prahu means boat in Indonesia. This term is very interestingly similar to Pahiri or Padagu in Tamil. So what we understand is that we cannot say that certain terms or watercrafts are entirely Indian. So we have certain common watercrafts that were used in Southeast Asia. In my opinion, these two terms, which are occurring in Indonesia and in Philippines, and being very similar to Tamil Nadu, they indicate the connectivity across. Because we see India as a land separate, but the sea was connected. So certain terms and terminology, what you find in Sri Lanka, South India, and Indonesia, in Southeast Asia and Philippines, they are very similar. So clearly, they indicate the long distance maritime connections. And archaeologically, the next question, archaeologically, we have excavated a boat in Kerala. I didn't show actually. Excavated a boat which could be a kind of Thoni kind of boat. There is another boat which we excavated that is near Kadakarapalli, that is of 13th century. I have not given the source actually. That boat is also very interesting because that is of 13th century. That is very important. So that boat is an important find. One second. I didn't show the image here. I'll try to share that here. So that is an
Okay, sir.
important. Yeah. I'll try to share a particular kind of screen. Yeah. Yeah, what you see here now is a kind of boat.
Sorry, sir.
You get here.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. This is of 13th century.
Yes, sir.
This was found at Kadakarapalli. This was found at Kadakarapalli, and similarly, another logboat was excavated at the site of Pattanam. I didn't show these two because I was focusing mainly on this literary reference. These are two parallels we have in South India. Both are from Kerala. They are some models that we have currently. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. That's yes, sir. That's all. No, still question have been come from the audience.
Okay. Okay.
So
Can you see this image? Yeah, this is another boat that we excavated at the site of Pattanam, and this is something very important. Yeah, this particular boat, this was found that has been dated to early historic period. That is another important canoe. That is a canoe which could be called Thoni. So we have two such examples of canoe found in South India. So any other?
okay, sir. So there is no question left.
Okay.
Thank you, sir, again for this wonderful session. And actually, we learned a lot. Actually, and the audience who will hear this session later, they will learn many things beyond that they have been known from about their classes and other.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And
See
thank you, sir.
some.
Okay. So, that's all today about our session. We will meet again on 27 March on Professor historian Sir Rajmohan Gandhi in a conversation with Professor Pattanath at 8 p.m. So that's all that day for the day. So good night and take care, sir, for this. And thank you, sir, again for this wonderful session. That's all of that day. Goodbye.